so we get to the brain. I'm sure you've all been curious about the brain. The brain is poorly understood, and the brain is all too often treated as a dustbin into which we stuff all the mysteries of the universe. On the slide here on the left, you can see the very popular blue brain, so beloved of the internet. This bears no relation to reality whatsoever. These blue images are unfortunately ubiquitous. Most of them originate in a single graphic studio in Seattle, but they have engendered all kinds of misunderstandings. On the right-hand side, you see what the brain actually looks like. It's an organ of the body. It's horrendously complicated, and it's made of tissue. It doesn't have rays going out to the cosmos, and so on. And the brain, of course, is a distinguished part of a much larger system, which is the nervous system. And this is what your nervous system looks like if you take it out of the body and lay it out. It's quite a frightening construct, isn't it? The nervous system looks like that. Now, if we try to figure out what a brain is or what it does or how it works, it's not going to make any sense unless we recognize it as part of a larger system, which is the nervous system. But the same argument holds that we're not going to be able to understand this nervous system dangling there in the black void because it makes no sense without a body. So we need to always understand it with respect to the whole body. And the funny thing is, bodies themselves make no sense without their particular worlds. A body functions in a particular physical environment and is difficult to understand if you don't understand the relation of the body to its world. Studying a fish in a forest, for example, will be misleading. So we'll try to remember this, that as we're looking at the brain, we need to understand its role within the nervous system, and the nervous system within the body, and the body with the associated view of the world. Now, there are very many people are interested in brains, of course, and we can approach the brain with very different sets of expertises, very different technical terms, very different kinds of scientific intervention. Anatomists, for example, will study the structures of the brain. They'll study the parts of the brain and how they connect to other parts. You might think anatomy of the brain would have been done hundreds of years ago, and it was, of course, but we still make new anatomical discoveries these days. But the skill set of the anatomist are quite different from the skill set of the physiologist. The physiologist is interested in process, in what's going on, what's changing over time, how are the various parts working together, and how are they integrated into the larger environment of the body. Physiologists will worry a lot about chemicals and fluids, and they bring a different view on the brain, but they look at it within the economy of the body. Then there's clinicians who meet people who have all kinds of problems. They may have growths, gunshots, degenerative diseases, and the clinicians are faced first of all with human problems, problems in getting by. And they have to try to understand the relation of the suffering that they see with respect to this organ. And that's a very different set of skills and uses different assumptions. There are lots of other specialists in there. The biochemists, for example, will study the world of molecular interchanges. And they bring very important skills to the table, but it's important to see that these are diverse skills. The anatomist is not a biochemist, is not a physiologist, is not a clinician. And of course, this being a cognitive science program, we're going to be interested in cognitive neuroscience. This is a very different game from the clinic or biochemistry or physiology or anatomy. In cognitive neuroscience, we're trying to make inspired guesses about how this organ relates then to the concerns that we've been occupying ourselves with notions like perception and so on. So nobody has the full story about the brain. And it's worth reminding ourselves that the brain is first and foremost mysterious. There there are plenty of people claiming that they know exactly what and how what the brain is, how it works, and so on. You shouldn't trust them. Our knowledge is partial. We must be humble here. The brain is very mysterious, mainly because it's of such intense interest to us. In some ways, the brain is the most sacred object in the universe because the story we tell about the brain greatly influences the story we tell about ourselves and our place in the whole scheme of nature. There are divergent views, as always, in cognitive science. Some seem to see the brain as if it was a mirror, as if we could find in there our personalities, our subjective lives, and so on. They seem to believe that when you look at the brain, you are looking in anatomical form at the person. For others, the brain appears rather more mute than that, and less of a reflective surface, and more as a puzzle to be figured out within the economy of the body. So there's going to be a great range of views here, and to be honest, we face a huge mystery. But remember that the brain will make no sense unless we understand it as part of a nervous system, which will make no sense unless we understand it as part of a body, which will make no sense unless we understand the world of that body. And this means that our discussions about the brain are always going to be political. Just remind yourself of the great deal of political energy generated by such subjects as abortion and euthanasia, and they will show you that the body is always a contested locus. Any casting of the body or the person is always going to have political implications as well. This is why I recommend a great deal of caution in interpreting all brain science. Now we're going to get to know some few parts of the brain. Here are the 4 primary lobes of the cerebral cortex. That's the heavily folded outer surface of the brain. And we'll explore those in small detail. The brain has lots of other structures as well as the neocortex. Here you can see the cerebellum dangling off the bottom of the brain, almost like a second brain. And where it says brainstem there, that leads to a whole host of deep structures connecting more directly to the spinal cord. So there's lots to see here, and we're not going to get to be experts in brain anatomy, but there is a tool available with which you can explore the brain for yourself, and it's free and it works on both Mac and Windows platforms. I recommend downloading this and playing it, and I'm just going to show you now a little demo of what this brain tutor can do, and go get it yourself and play with it. This is the interface of Brain Voyager Brain Tutor when we first open it up, and here we see a human head. We can quickly remove the covering to reveal the brain inside, which we can look at from all sides. Now, Brain Voyager Brain Tutor reduces the brain to merely the cerebral cortex, so there are deep brain structures. The cerebellum and the spinal cord are all not to be seen here. This is just for exploring the neocortex. We can look at the brain one hemisphere at a time, like this. And there we go. And we can select areas of the brain. Over here I've chosen lobes, so we can get it to display the 4 lobes of the brain. Let's have a look at them. The frontal lobe here at the front of the brain. This is the part of the brain that in humans is very large compared to any other animal. We'll have lots to say about the frontal lobe. It harbors lots of mysteries. We've already met the occipital lobe. This is at the back of the brain. Now, although the eyes are at the front of the brain, they're plumbed in weirdly so that this here is primary visual cortex at the very back of the brain. The temporal lobe is on the side of the brain, and it's here that we'll find primary auditory cortex running just inside here. And that leaves one left, which is the parietal lobe, which occupies the space between those other 3, and we'll have met the primary somatosensory cortex running down the very frontal extremity of the parietal lobe here. Now, a division into lobes is a fairly crude division, and you're required to know that one. But we can display more detailed information, for example, about the individual folds here. And a single one is called a gyrus, plural gyri, And so if we're interested, for example, in the orbital gyrus, we can find it here. It sits just above the eye socket, actually. That's the orbital gyrus. The gyri are the folds, and the sulci, or sulcus singular, these are the depths. So the brain is very, very folded, and those bits that stick up we call gyri, and those bits in the depths we call sulci. In clinical work, we need a more detailed way of talking about the brain, and so you will sometimes see brain areas numbered according to a system introduced by Brodmann. These are called Brodmann areas, and here you see Brodmann area 46. And finally, some parts of the brain are identified using what we'll call functional criteria. We'll discuss this more when we're talking about fMRI. But fMRI has identified a bunch of areas, and for example, here is a very small area, but a very important one, called the fusiform face area. And now you can see this is very deep in the brain, and we can't get a lot of information from this surface view. So we can switch to the volume view. This is a much more detailed view showing 3 different cross sections. The sagittal cross section on the top left has the front of the head at the left and the back at the right. In the coronal cross section, where we see a vertical slice through the brain, and the transverse is a horizontal slice. Transverse is also called the axial slicing, and you can hold one of these projections steady while you move your cursor through the so going from a front to back direction, we see interesting things in the coronal section. Going from a top to bottom section, we see interesting things in the transverse view, and we can change the sagittal view there. So you can explore the brain in great detail here if you need to look up any individual area.